I'm going to introduce her.
Okay.
So hi, everybody. Welcome, and I'm so glad that you are joining us today. We are in for a true treat. We have an amazing speaker. Her name is Linda Walker. And Linda works with entrepreneurs and professionals, adults with ADHD, who she calls her creative geniuses. And Linda has helped adults with ADHD move from chaos to overwhelm to productivity and feeling in control. Her unique approach has helped hundreds of entrepreneurs, professionals, and other creative geniuses. I have to say a word about Linda. In all the years that MCLD has approached her to come and give a presentation, write an article for us, get involved, she has never said no. So we want to thank you for your dedication to us. And we're so happy to have you here again, Linda.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I'm happy that you're here as well to provide support for the people of Montreal and especially people with attention deficit disorder and of course, learning disabilities. So thank you for asking me to present today. I look forward to doing so. So shall I share my screen? Would you like me to do that? So let's get started. And I do this often enough now that I know that what I'm supposed to do, because I often forget a small part of the whole thing and then it causes me issues. So I am unmuted. Okay, so actually I'll start here. So how to hotwire your ADHD brain. I know that it sounds like that's virtually impossible, but already your ADHD brain seems hotwired for a lot of people. But I have been coaching people with ADHD for quite some time. I graduated from the ADD Coach Academy in 2004. But I've graduated a long time ago in the School of Hard Knocks, and I've had the opportunity to be an alumni that returns to the School of Hard Knocks with a family that has ADHD. I've just lost my cursor here. I guess I'll use this one. So my husband has ADHD. He's also the president of the ADD Association, has been for the last few years. And my youngest daughter has ADHD and some pretty challenging learning disabilities. So I am going to work. I work mostly in areas of productivity, and that's where we're going to be working on what we're going to be working on tonight. So in terms of the objectives, we'll be looking at understanding why getting going is so challenging for people with ADHD, and looking at ways to overcome the challenges of motivation, activation, which is all of the planning and getting into action, productivity, and we're going to do it using research-based approaches. Some of them have been applied to people with ADHD in research. Some of them have been applied to just Joe Schmo, but they do work because I use them in my practice all the time. We'll also be talking about ways that you can enhance your motivation by improving your mood and how you could do that. We'll talk about some strategies for how to feed your dopamine hungry brain to overcome some of that procrastination that often happens with a lot of people that lead to what a lot of people refer to as the implementation gap. And we will also, I aim to provide really some tools that you can use to help you get started and keep going. So let's get started. So in terms of the factors that affect productivity, and when I talk about productivity, I mean not just work, I mean getting stuff, the important stuff done in your own life. And that could be projects, it could be studying, it could be, getting from point A to point B, getting into exercise, doing all of those things that are important to you. That's what I mean by productivity. It's not just about work. So to the factors that affect the productivity in everyone, are motivation. So you have to be motivated to get it done. You have to have a very clear vision of what you want, be very clear on what you're looking for. You need to plan. Although a lot of people don't like to plan, they don't want to be, they don't want to feel like they're constrained. You need to pay attention to certain things and not attention to other things. And then, of course, you need to take action. So when you look at this, it might not be too surprising for some of you who understand the challenges with executive functions that that plague people with ADHD, why all of these things can be very, very challenging for people with ADHD. If we look at executive functions, which are managed by the prefrontal cortex of the brain, there are two different schools of thoughts or two different ways of looking at it. I like the Tom Brown approach because it's more accessible to most, to the layman. And when you look at the types of things that your brain, your executive functions, this small portion of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, manages, it's not hard to understand that ADHD is definitely, it definitely affects your prefrontal cortex. So when we're looking at activation, we're talking about planning and prioritizing, getting into action. We're talking about focusing and putting in the effort that you need to get started, having when they talk about modulating emotions, they're talking really about being able to control your emotions so you don't jump on the next shiny object instead of doing the things that you wanted to do. The limited working memory is an incredibly big issue for most people with ADHD. It is the source of a lot of different challenges. And working memory is that part of your memory that computes and that keeps information while you're working on a problem. And somebody at one of the ADA conferences that I went to years and years ago spoke about this idea of, if we consider our table, our working memory, most people have different size tables, but let's say they might have a 2 by 3 foot table. Well, people with ADHD might have an 8.5 by 11 sheet, or even a Post-it note for a table. That's how much the working memory is a challenge. So of course, the smaller the table, the smaller the space, the less information you can store at any given time. So you need to account for that. You'll also, we also struggle with taking action, really getting started and staying, regulating the impulse to move to one thing or the other, or even regulating this, hyperfocus, because a lot of people tell me hyperfocus is, as much as it might seem like an amazing thing, it's also a big problem if you're hyperfocusing on the wrong things. So the factors that determine your level of motivations, we had talked about those 5 things: motivation, intention, planning, and so on. Let's look at the first one. We'll look at each one separately. So the factors that determine your level of motivation are self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is the level of belief, of your belief in your ability to accomplish a task. Then, of course, there is the value of the task. So if a task looks like it's interesting or the reward is interesting, those two things, the self-efficacy and the value of the task and reward, are going to, if they're high, will increase your level of motivation, whether you have ADHD or not. On the negative side, we have, of course, perceived effort. If you have ADHD and you perceive something is going to take an awful long time to get to, it's going to be much more challenging to stay motivated on that particular task. And of course, the delay to reward. So the longer it takes between completing the task and getting the reward, or even worse than that, starting and finishing the task to get to the reward, the lower your level of motivation is going to be. So all of these things are actually even worse for people with ADHD. These are for Joe Schmo, and of course we're all human before ADHD. But with ADHD, there's also more struggles with motivation. So we talked before about self-efficacy as being important. Well, for ADHDers, self-efficacy is often very poor. So because of a portfolio of failures that has taken years of accumulated mistakes and weaknesses and shortcomings, it's harder for you to feel like you're able to get to where you want to go, to accomplish a task that you've decided to do, or to bring a goal to fruition. The level of efficacy or self-efficacy is incredibly important, because it determines how much effort you're going to be putting into a particular task or project, and how resilient you'll be when you face challenges. It is, according to a lot of research, the most or the highest, let's say, predictor of achievement, higher even than IQ. So you could be incredibly smart and not get very far if your level of self-efficacy is not high or is very poor. Then there's, of course, self-regulation. So ADHDers struggle with poor self-regulation. That's, I was talking about emotion before. It's especially emotional self-regulation that's a big challenge. So emotional self-regulation is what allows you to resist the more salient, the more interesting task, so that you stay with what you had planned to do in the first place, even if it's a little bit more boring or a lot more boring. Unfortunately, with people with ADHD, when you're faced with a task that is boring, it's not that you don't want to do it necessarily. Maybe you don't, but maybe you do. But it does not stimulate your brain to allow you to tap into those executive functions that I was talking about. So you don't have the focus and the level of, you can't put the level of effort or the level of activation needed to make that task happen. And of course, people with ADHD have a very high need for dopamine, or what I call dopamine hits. Now, it's not that you have a higher need than most. It's just that there is a challenge. There is some challenges around the dopamine system, and I'll be talking about that momentarily. So another thing that kind of fits with all of those is the fact that limited memory, working memory, is a big challenge. It tends to not be able to hold a whole lot of information, so it's harder for you to see the reward that's generated from a long task. So that's where that dopamine can become a bit more difficult for you to access. If I'm Joe Schmo neurotypical, I might not have that kind of issue. I might be still, okay, so this is a boring task, but I know that once I get it done, I'll feel good about it. If I have ADHD, I could think of the task or I could think of the reward. I may not be able to think of both, and I may need to think of both. So let me see here. So the reward is going to take a long time to achieve. The effort needed to achieve it becomes insurmountable, and you will need to look for other options to get those dopamine hits. So that was motivation, and in motivation, we talked about self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is developed based on your interpretation of your own success. So it's not surprising that people with ADHD have low self-efficacy. I remember early on when I started my career in ADHD coaching, I was working with an entrepreneur who felt like as though he was not a very successful person, even though he had taken over his father's ailing business, had turned it around, made it into this much bigger organization that was now one of the top leaders in his field, and had branches in 5 different countries. Even though he had all of this done, he had been able to take this business that was about to die, bring it all the way to that. He still felt like a failure, because to him, he had not graduated high school, and to him that was horrific. Like, he should have been able to do it. So that's where we interpret sometimes our success as not success, and it should be. The other thing that develops your self-efficacy is seeing others that are like you succeeding. and at what you're attempting. So if you tend to hang around with people who are not really succeeding, you're going to struggle more. If you see other people, maybe neurotypicals, who are succeeding and you're struggling, you may think, well, they're neurotypical, that's why they're succeeding. I'm not. It doesn't necessarily develop your self-efficacy. You also develop a sense of self-efficacy based on verbal messages and the encouragement that you get from others. Now, verbal messages, obviously family becomes incredibly important, friends, teachers, employers. These people need to be to notice the progress rather than constantly pointing at the failings. And I know that's not always easy, because we're taught that how do you know what to fix if nobody ever tells you? Unfortunately, people tell you all the time, and the challenge is they don't necessarily show you an approach that works for them to manage those things. So verbal messaging is important, and encouragements from others. In organizations, I've done a little bit of coaching, well, a fair bit of coaching, but I'm not doing it anymore in organizations. I often tell employers or supervisors of people with ADHD, it's incredibly important that you provide faster feedback to your employee with ADHD. They need a much quicker feedback, because they will interpret everything as negative. And while they don't know, that's how they're going to see it. And then the fourth way that we develop self-efficacy is through our level of stress and anxiety. If we feel calm when we're doing something, we feel we have a higher level of self-efficacy. So if you're someone who has had some challenges in all those areas, you don't interpret your own success ever. All you see are your mistakes. You see only people who are incredibly successful, but that don't resemble you. You have only, people only point out all the things that you do wrong, and you have a very high level of stress and anxiety. Often, as a result of all that, it becomes very challenging to promote your self-efficacy. But let's look at how you could do that using these four pieces of the puzzle. So how you're going to promote your self-efficacy is to build a much more balanced view of your performance, and of course, to make success a lot easier to access. So they say, if you're struggling to get from point A to point Z, start looking at point B. And if that's too far, you might need to go in between. We need to make that success easier by chunking down tasks. When it comes to building a more balanced view of your performance, one of the challenges that I offer a lot of my participants in my programs is to keep a success journal. In the success journal, they need to write a minimum of three things, and hopefully up to 5 and more eventually, where they've had a positive impact. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about the success journal in a moment. The other approach is to join a community of other people who resemble you, who have had some success. And that's one of the things that's not always that easy to access. I like support groups. I think support groups are very useful when I just went too fast. Support groups are very useful, especially with managing your emotions, dealing with also feeling heard and understood and all of these. But sometimes there's very little progress that sometimes happens in some support groups, and that can cause some challenges. So one of the odd things, when I started doing my group coaching programs years ago, after we started improving our group coaching experience for our clients, we were asking, so what was an unexpected benefit that you got from the program? And one of the things that came out over and over again is self-acceptance. And okay, so tell me more, is what I would ask. And they'd say, well, seeing other people who are just like me, who've struggled with the exact same challenges and that are now starting to succeed, inspired me. and made me feel like I could do it and that I'm okay too. If they're okay and they have the same kind of challenges as I do, then I must be okay as well. So that could be, being in a support group that helps people notice their progress and actually celebrate some of the things that you do well. Can be incredibly inspiring for someone who has low efficacy. Then, of course, carefully choosing who you spend time with. So, of course, if the words of encouragement that you receive and the verbal information that you receive is really important to your self-efficacy, then you really do need to be careful who you hang around with. I've had some clients who've had to not spend as much time with loved ones for a little while because the negative sentiments from these people was more challenging than anything else. They didn't feel as though someone was really on their side. So being very careful about that. The other thing is, maybe you want to try to spend time with these people, but then you need to build really strong boundaries. And strong boundaries for people with ADHD is not always easy to do. So one way that, what it could look like would be something along the lines of, and I'm reminded of one of my clients whose friends used to make fun of him because of all the goofy things that he did. He wasn't doing them on purpose. They were just laughing at him and so on. So his strong boundary was something like this. Now, I know, guys, that in the past, I've let you make jokes at my expense, but it hurts. It really hurts when you laugh at me like that. And I would like for you to stop doing it now. Thank you. And making sure that they are reminded of that when they err. So that's one way of managing it. But having strong boundaries means you need to be ready for the challenges that you're going to face. And often we know who we have to build boundaries with, and you can prepare those in advance. Who are the people who are hurting you by the way they talk about you, by the way they don't show support, and so on. And how could you speak to them in a way that they could understand that that's not acceptable anymore. I've had clients who've said, you know what, until you speak to me better than that, or until you support me, I won't be talking to you about what I'm dealing with. I'll find somebody else to talk to. So we want to try to avoid that, but sometimes that's all that's possible. So, of course, level of stress and anxiety, that's never an easy one, because often people, when they get to that point, it's because it's an accumulation over time. So managing stress becomes incredibly important, and managing stress and anxiety always starts with taking extreme self-care of your brain. And that happens with a very strong ADHD-friendly lifestyle. That includes sleep and exercise and less sugar and more proteins and some downtime every day. So having some time every day when you are able to decompress, because having ADHD is not easy. It's a very challenging thing to deal with on a daily basis. And then, of course, mindfulness can be incredibly helpful, especially in building awareness around situations that tend to cause you to lose control. So if I'm someone who loses control easily, or I lose control over certain situations, if I look back at that situation and say, okay, what about it might have made me lose control? Well, I know that I start losing my composure when there are just too many requests at the same time, or when I'm jumping from one task to another because I can't figure out which one is more important to do. So understanding that, then you can prepare for it in advance. The same with mindfulness can also include what's going on in your body when this happens. So if you think back at a time when you were going through, you felt stressed, what was happening in your body? So think of things like tension, or maybe clenching of your fists or of your jaw, maybe your breathing. You may also have certain thoughts that show up all the time. When you become stressed, I can't do this, I'm not enough, all of these thoughts. When you notice these happening, as a result of situations, then ideally you would already have an accessible and easily accessible strategy to manage that. And easily accessible strategies are things like disengaging from the situation for a moment, just being able to remove yourself from it if that's possible, or taking a walk. Maybe it's, I think one that's really, really easy, really simple is taking 3 deep belly breaths. And why do we want to think of something that simple and easy and accessible as a strategy? Is because when you're under stress, your brain, you cannot access your thinking brain at all. You can only, you're really dealing with trying to survive. It's a fight or flight or paralysis mode. So you need to have something that you don't even have to think about. It's okay, when this happens, this is what I need to do. Every time I feel stressed, I need to take 3 belly breaths, for example. You need to be clear on what you do before it happens. So if you struggle from this type of stuff, you might want to sit back at a time when it's quiet and think back, okay, the last time this happened, what were the precursors? What was the situation? What were the factors that might have contributed? How was I feeling? And if you think about physically what you might have been feeling, and what could be something that I do, what I call my overwhelm first aid kit, which is usually starts with the belly breaths. And by having that access and being very clear on that, you're a lot more likely to be able to access them. You may need therapy as well. There are some people who struggle incredibly with anxiety. Having a stress management plan and so on becomes quite important. So next. So when we are motivated by dopamine, so I spoke about motivation, I spoke about your self-efficacy, and how you can improve that. Now let's talk about managing the dopamine system. So your dopamine system is, dopamine is a neurotransmitter, and neurotransmitters are chemical messengers in your body that transmit information from one nerve cell to another in your muscles, in your glands, and so on. So think of endorphins, think of adrenaline, acetylcholine, and of course, dopamine is one of the most potent in our situation. Dopamine system includes your dopamine, but also the dopamine transporters, dopamine receptors. And there's different varying research that shows one versus another might be more and less. That's not quite as important. What we know and what's really important is that these things, the dopamine system regulates emotional responses to things. It allows you to take action. It gives you pleasure as a reward. And that's something that we all seek. So if I am neurotypical and I've completed something that I've had that's been a challenge for me, I will get pleasure from having completed it. If I have ADHD, I might find that difficult to do if it wasn't a very pleasant task. Maybe I will if I take the time to think about it. But for people with ADHD, there's a glitch in the dopamine system, and that makes it very challenging to deal with unappealing tasks that don't generate much pleasure. Unfortunately, there's quite a few of those that we often end up having to do. And you, as a result, you try to get distracted. You don't try, but your dopamine system or your brain is constantly looking for other ways of making things a lot more fun, of you're seeking pleasure through other tasks or other things. That's why you might turn and watch some, I don't know, cat videos on YouTube or whatever. So it is a biological problem, but a hack for that is to design better tasks, starting with injecting interest, novelty, intrigue, challenge, and when it's absolutely necessary, urgency. You could do that. You can do all of that with a number of different approaches, and I'll talk about a few of those in a moment. You also can make fuzzy tasks more tangible. Dr. Russell Ramsey wrote a book last year, Rethinking ADHD. And he was talking about how the the tendency that need for dopamine can be an issue, but what makes makes people with ADHD more likely to procrastinate, and they procrastinate with a task that might seem productive. They procrastinate, procrastivity is a term that he coined, is often because the task is, of course, not interesting, but also it might be fuzzy. A fuzzy task is a task that's uncertain. You don't know when to call it done. You don't know how to get it done. You can't even imagine, or you can imagine every possible problem that are going to be, that you're going to be faced with. I've been procrastinating completing the migration to a new accounting system because I know I'm going to have to do a whole bunch of things that I don't particularly like to do. And I'm imagining all of this. So now I'm kind of stuck. I'm going to have to do it. And of course, waiting till the last minute is, of course, one of those ways of injecting urgency into the whole matter. And then, of course, making the reward easier to access. And you can make the reward easier to access by making it faster. You can also, when you're making rewards easier to access, you might do that by either making the task shorter or creating a reward that is more accessible if the natural reward is not accessible. So, for example, if I'm exercising, when I start an exercise program, I may not have the reward of feeling good afterwards. I might actually feel pretty sore. So maybe I need to create an artificial reward, at least until I start reaping the benefits of, or the reward of exercise. I'm thinking, for example, think of Rocky, who's at the end of his run, when he's running around and he goes up those stairs in his gray sweats, and he's got his hands up in the air, celebrating winning because he's imagining himself getting that reward. So you don't need to reward yourself necessarily with a piece of cake. You can actually do it with even certain gestures or even visualizing. Let's look at some examples. So how do we redesign or design tasks that provide a quicker dopamine hit? As I mentioned before, you can inject that interest, novelty, and challenge. So some ideas on that. It might be a bit challenging right now because I know going into a coffee shop is not necessarily possible everywhere. Coffee shops are actually body doubling that's kind of tricked into you. I used to go when I was studying, I used to go to the Starbucks at the corner here. I'm a lifelong learner, so I'm always learning something and studying. And they had a full table of students who were just, all they did was plug in and work on their own, but we were all there, and it's kind of using the whole trick of body doubling, which works beautifully for people with ADHD. Going into a coffee shop or doing, I like to work, for example, in my yard, not at this time of the year, of course, but in the summer. My backyard is beautiful and I love it. It tricks the brain into thinking the task is a lot more fun than it actually is. You can listen to music, and those of you who are parents who have kids who are struggling with homework and so on, often your kids have a tendency to want to listen to music while they're working. And I know when my daughter wanted to do that, my youngest daughter, I couldn't understand at the time. I was not a coach. I was not born a coach. And I didn't understand that this was something that would trick her brain into thinking that the task was more fun than it was, and she would be able to focus better. So you want to be able to do, let your kids listen to music if it's something that's actually supporting their ability to work. Creating a game. And I know some people will say, well, it should be instrumental. Not necessarily. My husband does not work well with instrumental. He works well with rock music, as long as he knows the lyrics, oddly enough. Creating a game with yourself could be a way. My husband has this weird rule that he uses. I asked him once, like, I'm a little bit of a messy person. I always leave a spoon lying around in the kitchen or something, and it used to bug him. And he keeps the kitchen so clean, and I couldn't understand it. He has ADHD, and I'd say, how do you keep the kitchen so clean after you finished? And he says, well, I pretend I'm a spy and that no one should know that I've been here. right? So you can create these kinds of games, and ADHDers are more, my creative geniuses are a lot more creative than most. So there's that you might be able to use your creativity. Getting started is almost always the biggest hurdle for most people. And making getting started easier can be helpful. Your working memory deficits make it difficult for you to go beyond the task, as I mentioned before, beyond the task to the reward. So creating shorter tasks that are rewarded much more quickly will allow you to increase your motivation. So you do that by making, for example, a fuzzy task more tangible. It can include, let's say, breaking down the task into what looks like smaller chunks, of course, but it can also be by setting a limit on how long you're going to spend on the task. Or if you don't know where to start, it is not likely a task, it is more than likely a project, and break it down some more. You can even break it down backwards. So let's say I've finished it. What did I do just before I did? And you could decompose the project. As long as it's not a very long project, that could be very a useful way of doing it. An example might be, if let's say I'm struggling to write a report, and I am really I'm really trying to find a way to start. Well, I might open Microsoft Word. Well, okay, so that was easy to do. So I still can't write the report. So I'll just type my name. I'll just type the report title. Okay, so maybe that helps a little bit, but no, I'm still not able to write the report. So why don't I just write, what is it that I need to talk about? What are the sections that I'm going to have to talk about? So I might split that up. And then if I'm still not started, I might decide, well, I'll just write one sentence, that says my key message for each of these sections. And often by the time you start that first sentence, you get the momentum going. And so these tiny little starts can actually get you a real start. I like, and my clients who have a fair bit of writing to do and who really struggle with doing that, I often recommend Inspiration. It's a mind mapping software. I like it because you pay for it once. You don't pay for it 100 million times every month and so on. You pay for it once, and you could break down the project or whatever it is that you're trying to do into a mind map with keywords, identifying the keywords. So I want to talk about this. I'm going to want to talk about that. Oh, and there's this, that true. And when I talk about this, I should also talk about this and that. And so you could break it down into a mind map. And then what's really cool about this is that you can then change it, convert it into a Word document, and then you're provided with an outline. So you already know what those sections are going to be. Then, of course, the easy button, you want to create bounded tasks. So tasks that are bounded are tasks that are extremely specific. So when I talked about Russell Ramsey's book, he had analyzed what was it about the task that people were procrastinating or procrastinating. By procrastinating, they were doing another task that might have been considered productive, but not necessarily the task that they had planned to do in the first place. And what was it about those tasks? And one of the things that he realized was that they weren't very clear on they weren't specific. They weren't specific about things like how long is it going to take before it's done, how much time, and so on. I had one of my clients who wanted to write a novel, and she had organized time with her employer to have some time, some free time when the kids weren't around during the workday. And but months had passed and she had made zero progress in her book. So we worked on, improving her focus and managing her beliefs, because that's an incredibly important part of the puzzle. But we also organized her schedule so that she could set aside at the beginning 30 minutes or more each morning, and eventually went up to 45 before her kids got up, and write a maximum of 45 minutes or 500 words, whichever was the least. So if she made it to 45 and didn't get 500 words, but that was it. But most of the time she got beyond her 500 words in less than 45 minutes. Within a few months, she had half of her novel written. Pomodoro works exactly like that. The Pomodoro technique uses a tomato, tomato timer. You set it for 25 minutes to work on a task, and then you get a 5-minute break. It's the same kind of thing. By making the task very specific, very bounded, it's easier. And bounded could mean time, the amount of time you devote to it, the number of words, the measurement. Maybe it's filing half an inch of paper a day, right? So again, we know that some people are going to be dreamers. They're going to dream and they can visualize the end game. They're inspired by it, but they may not necessarily get started all that easily. They might struggle to take action because they can't see that. Other people are dwellers and they are more worried. They worry about everything that's going to go wrong. And as a result, they may struggle a lot more in taking action because they're just not really all that enthused about the task, because all they see are the problems. People with ADHD have a challenge with, I mentioned it before, but I'm mentioning it again, their limited working memory that only allows them to be able to hold one of those two in their mind at any given time. So they may be big dreamers that never get anything done. They're the ones that inspire everyone, or they may be those people who are worried and they never made a decision. They never ever make a decision because they're always worried that they don't have all the information that they need. So people with ADHD struggle even more than that. The ideal situation is to be able to mix the two, because they are both really important to getting things done. And you could do that with a hack of two different strategies. One is the implementation intention. So in formulating an implementation intention is identifying specifically when, where, and how you're going to get something done. Studies have shown that in some studies, it's shown to double the amount of, you have double the chances of getting something done. In other studies, it was closer to 3 times more likely to get things done than if you did not have an intention, an implementation intention. And then the other piece that could be very helpful, because sometimes implementation intention might look like just a wish. It might tell you how much time and where you're going to do it, but it won't necessarily look at what might get in the way. So this is where mental contrasting comes in to solve that implementation issue. Mental contrasting looks at creating at the obstacle and then creating a contingency. And the two together become a very useful tool that I use quite often with my clients. It's called the WHOOP. So the WHOOP is a 4-step hack. First step is your wish. So what is it that you wish? Notice I didn't use the word goal or anything like that, but wish sounds more like, oh, wow, what do I want to do? What do I want to achieve? Okay. But a wish can be a task. It could be a project. It could be a goal. I might want to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep each night. That might be my wish. Some of you might not be all that inspired by that, but when we get to step 2, that'll help. So identifying the outcome, what will be the outcome of getting that, of achieving that? So why would I want to do that? Why is it important to me? So maybe I'm struggling with my focus, and as a result, I'm not being very productive. And as a result, I feel like I have to work many more hours than I should. I come home, I'm exhausted, and I don't have any energy to do anything else. So knowing the outcome will help me. So maybe in my case, I want to get to sleep because I know that I'll be better able to focus. I'll feel more in control. I won't be so likely to get overwhelmed and so on. I might actually reach my potential. Maybe I'll have the energy left at the end of the day for other things, like maybe having fun with my family and so on. And you want to stop at step 2 and really visualize what that feels like, feel it out so that you really get a feel for what that's going to be, because that'll help with that dopamine. You'll get the dopamine right away. Step 3 is the obstacle or the gap. So a gap might be a learning that you need to do. Maybe you need to learn something, but the obstacle could be anything. It could be, well, what is stopping me from getting those 7 to 8 hours of sleep? Well, maybe I feel I do have an alarm that's set up, because that's what neurotypicals will say. Well, just set an alarm. Duh. I might set an alarm, but I still don't do it. Why don't I do it? Well, because you need to go further. What is the obstacle that's stopping you from doing that? You need to go deeper. So maybe you might look at, okay, so why do I disregard that and instead play video games? Well, the reason why the obstacle is there is maybe I spent all my day doing homework or doing work and doing what my teacher, my boss, my parents, my friends, and everybody else wanted to do. And I never really got a chance to do a whole lot of the things that I wanted to do for myself. And so this is, by the way, a perfect example of revenge bedtime procrastination. And that's why I don't. So I'm looking for a way to find enjoyment for myself, something that I have control over during the day. So step 4 is planning. So now that I know that that's the problem, let's plan how to overcome that obstacle. So in my case, I might consider, well, I could set a timer. Instead of setting a timer that says you need to go to bed now, maybe set a timer earlier and say, okay, how was your day today? What kind of day did you have? Do you feel happy with or satisfied with your day? Do you feel as though you've had some time to chill and to do something you really, really wanted to do? So now if I don't feel that way, then I allow myself half an hour or an hour to do something that I enjoy, but I would really limit it to that. And that allows you then to be ready the next time this happens with if-then statements. So if-then statements are, so if it's 8 o'clock, let's say, and my alarm goes off and I have not been very happy with my day, then I will reserve I'll play video games for half an hour, or I'll talk to a friend for half an hour, or whatever it is that will float your boat. You need to be ready ahead of time for these types of things. That's why in my programs, I usually have my clients look at what is going to stop them from being able to learn the material that's in the program ahead of time, and then creating a plan. And often it's the same things that interrupt you. It's people stopping by. It's almost always the same things that have stopped you in the past. So if you look at those, you'll already have you'll already know what the obstacles are, and you'll be able to create a plan, a contingency plan. And if you're ready with it, then you're a lot more ready with a script. For example, for somebody shows up at the door, you say, oh, I'd love to talk, but listen, I've already got some commitments, a really important thing that I have to do. Can we meet tomorrow? Or can I call you later and we can meet at a coffee shop, or I can come over, or whatever, right? You have that ready beforehand. If you don't, you're like a deer caught in the headlight, not a good thing to do. So that's the whoop. And the whoop can be used in so many different situations. When you're starting a new project, when you're faced with struggling with completing something, you can use the whoop and try to figure out what is it that's getting in the way, and then looking at a contingency plan. Then, of course, there is, you want to be able to be clear. So we had talked before about being clear about what you want, as an intention, and being clear on what you want in terms of planning and so on. So there's the reticular activating system. So this is something that I don't present very often on. I think this is probably the second time I've presented on this. The reticular activating system is a part of your brain that begins at the top of your spine, the spinal cord. It extends about 2 inches. And if I had to summarize what it does for a living, it basically, what you pay attention to grows, and it grows in your conscience. So it's a gatekeeper for information. If you consider all of the information that you receive from your sensory organs, except for the nose, sense of smell is managed somewhere else. It's incredible the amount of information that comes in. And if you were to absorb all of that into your consciousness, you would not be able to function. You would be completely overwhelmed. Right now, if you stop a moment and you look around your room where you are, the room that you're sitting in, and you look at everything that's in front of you, maybe even listening to some of the sounds that you might not have heard before. There's all of these things were there before, but you were not paying attention to them because of your reticular activating system. So the reticular activating system actually filters anything that you don't necessarily need to know and brings it to your conscious mind, your conscious brain. So if we didn't have that, we would be completely overwhelmed. We'd get nothing done. The RAS, or the reticular activating system, only selected information that you needed to pay attention to, and it decides what's important and ignores what's not important to you. And it decides that, first of all, by if it's something that's dangerous. So the reticular activating system notices things that are relevant to you, that are dangerous to you. So I might be sitting here in the summer, let's say I'm sitting outside and I'm talking to someone, and all of a sudden I feel something on my arm, and I feel it because my reticular activating system was activated and says, hey, check out what's on your arm, and you notice a mosquito. If you're in my mom's yard, that's what's there. It's all mosquitoes. And it's there to protect you. Or you're in a room. Let's say you're in a room with a whole bunch of people, and everybody's talking, and you're listening to a conversation that's in front of you, and you hear somebody in the back of the room mention your name. Why did you hear that and you didn't hear anything else? Well, what happened is that your reticular activating system picked it up because it was relevant to you. So that's one of the things that it does. But it also brings what you decide to bring. You can actually program it by being very clear on what you want, your goals. So if I'm someone, I remember a few years ago, I wanted to buy a car, and I wanted a Toyota RAV4. Dwayne wanted a different car, but I won, of course. But as soon as we decided, or as soon as I decided I wanted a Toyota RAV4, I could see them everywhere. They were everywhere. Now, was it that all of a sudden they came to me? All of a sudden, they came in front of my house or in front of wherever I was? No, I just paid attention. I just noticed it because my reticular activating system made me notice them. And in doing so, I was able to point them out to Dwayne, and he was able to see, oh, you're right, it is a better car than what I was looking at. So we ended up buying a RAV4. So you can program your reticular activating system to pay attention to a number of different things. So you do that by making sure that you pay attention to the right things. You hotwire your reticular activating system. You do that by feeding it with positive self-talk. And positive self-talk, if you have ADHD, is not incredibly easy. So you might need to support yourself for a while with a success journal. And actually, a success journal is not a bad thing to keep all the time. When I'm teaching my planning program, one of the things that we do in the planning is once you've completed a task, when you do your weekly review of your tasks, when they're completed, they go in a done list if you want to. And that becomes kind of your success journal. But your success journal should not only have tasks that you've done. I think other important things that should go in your success journal are things where you've made a difference. Maybe it's maybe you've helped somebody, maybe you smiled at someone, you solved a problem at the office, you made a contribution towards world peace. Who knows? It can also be progress or an effort that you made. So maybe I'm usually 20 minutes late at work, but this morning I was only 10 minutes late. Now, most ADHDers would poo-poo all over themselves for being 10 minutes late, but hey, you just made progress and you need to note that. And a lot of people roll their eyes thinking, why would I do that? That's so stupid. Because you're feeding your reticular activating system, showing you that you do make progress, that you're not broken, that you are able to function, and you are someone that's worth wanting more for. So the reticular activating, the success journal can be a very helpful thing. The gratitude journal can be incredibly important as well. There has been quite a bit of evidence that shows that writing what you're grateful for actually positively impacts your mood. And it was actually even shown in students, university students showed that it increased their motivation, their academic motivation. So gratitude journal, in there you would write, maybe you give yourself 3 to 5 things that you are grateful for every day. And if you have more, hey, go for it. But there are so many things we could be grateful for. Um, I live in a house. I'm not out on the street. I am safe. I have been fed today. I have clean water. I have people in my life, that at least one person in my life that likes me, hopefully me, but also other people. There's so many different things that can be grateful for. I was grateful that I was able to get my vaccine. That was something I was really grateful for, because that was freaking me out. But I've also found that the gratitude journal has been helpful for me. Even a few years ago, I went through a depressive bout, and I thought there was nothing I could do right. All I could see were all the things that I was doing wrong. And as a result, I lost motivation. I didn't feel like doing anything, and so on. And it so happened that I like learning. So of course, that's always exciting for me. And I found this course that just showed up. And I enrolled in it. And the first thing they had you do, and every single day you had to write a gratitude journal every single day. And within less than 2 weeks, my mood was completely turned around. I was back to a much more bright-eyed and bushy-tailed me, which I usually am. So the gratitude journal could be very helpful. Another thing that you could do to really hotwire your reticular activating system is to define your tasks and your goals very clearly, knowing as well what their relevance is, and using a planner. A lot of, I studied a whole bunch of documents on procrastination, on how to overcome procrastination, what causes procrastination, and so on. I wrote a program or a course on that. I haven't yet marketed it, but it's coming up eventually. And one of the things that was really surprising to me was the number one cause of procrastination in people with ADHD is not planning. So you come across, you arrive at your desk, let's say, and now you say, okay, I'm going to work, and I haven't planned a thing. So now I'm going to jump from one thing to another, to another, to another. And what's going to take over? It's the thing that's the most fun and enjoyable. Is it necessarily the task that you really need to do that's the most impactful for what you're trying to achieve? No. So you need to clarify and plan. And ideally, you want to be able to visualize that end goal. Chunking tasks into smaller tasks will also provide you with a much quicker feedback. Let's talk about planning now. So planning, you want to first always, and this is one of the first things I teach in my planning program, you want to limit what you take on. So to prioritize, I don't prioritize tasks at all. And I don't necessarily think that's always a good idea, because when I look at people's to-do list, they're like 200 things. If you're trying to prioritize one task over another, it'll take you 100 years to get through all of them. So instead, prioritize projects. Look at what's really important in your life. What are the projects? And start with that. And park the ones that you don't, that are not a priority right now. I just launched a program about a month ago. And when I did, I had to put aside a couple of other projects. I want to redo my website. It's 100 years old, my darn website, my corporate website. It's so old. I want to get it redone. And I also need to migrate to the new accounting platform that I'm already paying for, that I have been paying for a few months now. So I parked those projects while I worked on the launch, and I worked on helping my clients onboard, get into the program and be able to be supported where they need it. Now those things are, and of course, October month, which is so crazy for people who work with people with ADHD. Now that October is almost over and my clients are almost all onboarded, then I can start prioritizing the other things that I need to prioritize. So prioritizing projects and only limiting it means that I don't need to to spend so much time trying to prioritize tasks. We know another thing I have them do at the beginning is make a list of all the things that they want to be able to do in a week, and then determine how much time they want to spend on each of these and then calculate it. And almost every single one of them comes up with 200 plus hours. And they haven't even included sleep or exercise or anything in that. Just to be clear, there's only 168 hours in a week. So do the math. There's going to be some stuff that's going to have to be parked for a while. Then you want to streamline planning with recurring routines that support you, routines like sleep. If you don't sleep enough, you're not going to be productive. You're not going to be able to focus. You're going to get overwhelmed more easily. You'll suffer a lot more from stress. Getting some cardio activity, and so on. Those things need to be in there. Planning needs to be in there. And I believe, meal planning, but also planning downtime, planning your week and the things that you need to do. And then, of course, making appointments with yourself and keeping them. Keeping appointments with yourself is incredibly important. If you don't keep appointments that you make with yourself in your calendar, you put them in your calendar, you start losing your self-efficacy, because you start believing that there's no way I'm ever going to make anything done, I'm never going to have anything happen, because I say I'm going to do things and then I don't even do them like I said I would. You're being the CEO of your brain when you do your own planning. If you don't plan, somebody else will plan your day for you. So make sure you put it in your calendar. And yes, I know, I totally get that you're going to plan and some of the stuff won't get done. And most of the people who take my program, my planning program, at the beginning, a lot of the stuff doesn't get done because they're not planning everything. They forget a bunch of things that they haven't jotted down, that they haven't incorporated in their planning. So as a result, they're also underestimating how long it takes to do any sort of tasks. So you want to be able to make an appointment with yourself and keep it, and be okay with the fact that there will be some tasks that you won't get done. But one thing that happens with the planning, as we get ready or used to planning on a weekly basis, eventually they start, first of all, the planning takes a lot less time, but they are less likely to have tasks left over that aren't done at the end of the week. So that's very helpful. Now I'm looking at the time. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the habit loop, but I don't think I have enough time for that. Habit loop is a tool that's really useful. Given that I don't really have time, I want to be able to take some time for questions. What I can do is invite you to my program. This is my Your Path Forward program. Explains the habit loop. It also provides you with 10 weeks of support. It's each week you get a video on a particular theme around routines that are required, that are needed for people with ADHD. It allows you to, it gives you some strategies for how to do it. And then we invite you to choose one that you can implement during the week. And then the second week, you get an email that tells you, hey, there's a new video out, come and get it. And so you get on and so on. You can get the course usually costs $97 Canadian, but you can get it for free. You go to Adult ADHD Solutions with an S, and the coupon code is Your Path Free, all in lowercase. I'm going to write that in the chat. So, and I'm going to change that because I've got one person in particular, and the code. So the way the coupon code works, you come in and you do as if you were buying the program. You press on the buy now. It'll ask you some information in one window. When you finish that information, you go on to the second window. There's a link that says got a code. You click on that and you put the coupon code that is Your Path Free, all in lowercase. So now I'm ready for questions. I hope I haven't put you to sleep and I've kept your your dopamine up.
Oh, I just let everybody can now unmute themselves. I'm not sure. Do you want people to send it in the chat, or do you want them to just put their hands up?
They could put their hand up unless there's some in the chat. Have there been any in the chat? You know, Linda?
There's one that says, what if you are more the type that hyperfocuses and gets lost in the task to the point that the RAS is dysfunctional? What do you do to break out of the zone?
Yeah. So you might need to create some disconnection, forced alerts and things like that to kind of, I remember years ago, there was a planner that you could get, an ADHD planner that was online, and he would come up and say, what are you doing? 15 minutes from now, you got to stop. And then 5 minutes from now, hey, you're almost, and then at the end, it would tell you all kinds of horrible things. You would write it down, of course. You'd say, you jerk, what are you doing still here? And, but it's to rouse you out of that hyperfocus and recognizing that after you finish a task, you need to then look at your calendar and see there's other things that you had planned to do. One of the biggest challenges that most people have is being able to listen to themselves. So we often don't listen to what we had planned to do in all of this. We know that we're supposed to be doing something else, but I'm really involved in this. Unless it's going to take a few minutes, I usually give my clients or people in my planning program, I tell them, okay, so if it's going to take less than, let's say, 5 minutes to finish, take the 5 minutes, but it has to be 5 minutes and no more, so that you don't transition. But then you got to let it go. If it's not finished, you have to then reschedule another time when you're going to complete the task. And that there's nothing more that you could do about that, unfortunately, unless you get a zap or something that will zap you from doing it after a certain amount of time. But
as you noted earlier, the Pomodoro timer technique works as well. It artificially adds that in. So.
Yeah, it does. So the Pomodoro, I had a client who he was a client, he became a friend. He was someone who, for the Pomodoro, for the 5 minutes break, the 5-minute break that you get, he would, instead of taking a full break, he would think back about the task that he had just completed and how amazing it was to have completed it. And do I want to continue? So if you're really struggling with that, maybe the Pomodoro or some approach like that chunks your time into smaller slots and makes you stop, or drink a lot of water. You're going to have to get up and pee at some point. That's another trick. If you wanted to ask a question, you can also put your hand up. You can There
is another question that says, well, two people actually asked what do you think about CBD oil and ADHD and other medications? What are your thoughts?
Okay, so CBD oil, I've read so many different controversial information about it. Medication, I believe that whatever works for you works for you. It was one of the hardest things that we did was to choose for my daughter to take medication. But it helped. It made a huge difference. The same with my husband. Both my daughter and my husband take medication for ADHD. But I also respect people who decide not to. The only thing is, if you decide not to, you will need to really, 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 really work very strongly on your lifestyle. You're going to need to get enough sleep. You're going to need to take care of eating well, get away from the sugar and the simple carbs and get some exercise in, because if you want to really function with your ADHD, you need to be able to overcome that with some way. Is there did you have another question before I take on? I see Marie, for example, who's got her hand up.
Well, there are, but go ahead with Marie.
Okay, Marie.
Hi, do you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I tried to type it, but it was too complicated. The tips for planning and reviewing, like what you've done during the week, it's always like efficiency tips, and just thinking about that, and I just feel tired already. Like I feel bored already. I've done so much, I try so much way to just plan and do tasks, and each time it stick a little bit, and then I change and I change. It's really hard for me to just stick to one thing. So just planning, just taking planning and reviewing and making appointment with myself, I feel bored and tired already. I don't know how to overcome that.
So one thing that you could do, as much as possible, choose things that you like to do. Like in terms of work, if you're going to choose a career, as much as possible, choose something that you really love that plays to your strengths. That's a number one thing that I would say there. The other thing is for people who have, it's often a belief that brings you to feel like that. You look at this and you have a belief that planning is just going to block you in. You're not even going to be able to make the plan happen. And so you have that belief and it blocks you from being able to access it. So I often tell my clients that are starting off with planning, who have that kind of challenge, to only plan one single thing in the day, but do it when they say they were going to do it, and take a moment afterwards to think about how they feel having accomplished what they had planned to do. And then maybe a few weeks later, when they've been able to consistently do that, do 2 tasks a day that you plan in your schedule. Often people over plan. They put way too many things. And as a result, they look at their calendar and it's just so incredibly overwhelming that they don't feel very like they don't feel like it's all that enjoyable to plan. So you want to be able to start with, start easy. I always believe very strongly in the small steps. If you try too big a step, you're making it too difficult for yourself, and you're going to fall back into your zone of your comfort zone, and you're not going to be able to really feel like you can do this. But it's doable. You just need, almost like starting to exercise your muscles. You don't start with 100 pounds. You start with a pound, or maybe with soup cans or something like that. That's how I started. I don't know. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I have several other questions. Do you have any thoughts about addiction in ADHD people?
Well, definitely there's the addiction is very, very strongly related to dopamine. So it happens quite often with people with ADHD to have struggle with addiction. Either I've seen some clients, for example, struggle with extreme sports. They do things that are incredibly dangerous because they need that, the dopamine hit. Others who've taken drugs and so on, a lot of them end up self-medicating because they're not treating their ADHD. So there's some people feel that you shouldn't, for example, if somebody has a drug problem and they have ADHD, we shouldn't be giving them stimulants. However, there's some that's controversial. Some experts feel that if we treated the ADHD in the first place, the other drugs would not show up, or maybe they might, but it would be like marijuana and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So,
if I may comment, although I did a test when I was younger, I didn't really follow through, and I recently found out that I have ADHD, and I have to say that my entire life, I have always forgotten something when I left the house every single day. The minute I started to take medications was the moment that I stopped forgetting things at home. And it's just been incredible. Yes, it's been incredible.
awesome.
It's really helped me in many different ways. And I'm very anti-drug because I grew up vegetarian and on homeopathic medication. So it was a very difficult decision for me as well. But I don't think that it should be a reason that you don't consider it as a solution, because
Absolutely.
you never know. And if the child is it's an extreme case, it might actually help them, in the long run.
In our case, I knew that if we were looking at my daughter's, how she was performing in class, and it's not just performing, is she couldn't pay attention. If you spoke to her, you had her attention for a maximum of 10 seconds, and then you could see the eyes glaze over. There is no way that a child who pays 10 seconds of attention in class can capture any sort of the information that they need to be able to succeed. So for us, that's what made us decide. And there comes a point when if a child has had a lot of failures, it becomes even harder and harder to support them, because they now have the bigger portfolio of failures on their backs, and their self-efficacy is down the toilet, and getting them motivated to do anything becomes incredibly difficult. So I tend to be pro medication. I feel when people tell me I don't want to take medication, I ask, so where have you gotten information about it? What are your thoughts about it? What are your fears about it? And asking a few questions. And I've had some clients who, after they started looking at, solid information about it, and asking people who had ADHD, who had taken medication, realized that it was very helpful. It's not the panacea. It's not going to solve all of your problems. Pills don't build skills. You have to then manage your life. Dwayne, my husband, often uses as an analogy, we are an ADHD family. There's 4 of us, 2 who have been diagnosed with ADHD. One is we're not sure. And the other one, definitely no ADHD there. But we've created a household for people, designed for people with ADHD. So when you live with someone who is blind, you are a family of a blind, where there's blindness. And as a result, you don't move the furniture around. You create, you put things where they need to be so that the person doesn't fall all over the place. Well, we do the same with ADHD. So yes, you take your medication, but you also need some strategies, some systems, and the people in your life need to support those systems as well. Otherwise, the whole process is moot. So I see Megan.
There's hands up, but there were questions way before the hands went up.
Okay, so I'll take the questions, and I'll take
there's just 2 that.
Go ahead.
So one of them asks for a recommended psychiatrist if they want to try testing out medications. Do you have any psychiatrists, or where would they find them?
They're not all that easy to find. Some of the ones that I knew. Do you know anybody, Linda? Pam?
Many of them have retired.
Exactly.
There are some private.
Yeah.
And it's up to your GP to recommend people, but there are some private. I know of a few.
Yeah, and many of them, I know there's at least one French private one, but there's a waiting list of several years. It's quite expensive to see him. So it's very difficult, but you can find, if you go to, I think CADRA, CADDRA, it's a Canadian ADHD, I can't even remember what they are, but these are all they're doctors and professionals that work with people with ADHD, or who believe in ADHD and are interested in that. At CADRA, you might be able to find either a psychiatrist or even a general practitioner who is well versed. There's a lot of GPs that are well versed. Unfortunately, most of them are full, but I know of 2. You'll have to pay for them at the at Rockland Center here. There's two women who are well versed in ADHD and can definitely medicate people or provide medications.
Sorry to interrupt you. You can also call our MCLD line, because we have a resource list.
Excellent.
And I spend time on the telephone answering questions from families or from individuals. Excellent. I wanted to just say something to Leo a while ago when he was talking about. Leo, are you still here?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I wanted to tell you that I was doing an ADD support group for adults who were diagnosed later in their life because their kids were first diagnosed. And it was so beautiful, because for the first time, they told me, after taking just a small amount of the medication, they were able to read for the first time. They were crying their eyes out. So it's so wonderful to see adults have success, and then they feel better about their kids being on some medication and having success too. So thank you for sharing that.
No problem.
Yeah, I see that in the chat, somebody shared the phone number for the contacting phone number. So
I said that.
Thank you, Linda.
The other question that was there a while ago was
Mhm.
about the diets, which that you recommended, why protein and what diet would be good for ADHD. And then that's it for me in terms of questions from the
Okay.
chat.
So the first thing is, as much as possible, eliminate sugar and simple carbs. There has been a lot of studies on, more and more studies on that. And we know that sugar has an impact on mood. It has an impact on dopamine and so on. In terms of there was a nutritional psychiatrist whose name is Dr. Eva Selhub, Selhub, who's written a few things on feeding your brain properly. And she talks in general of mental health. So it's feeding your brain for better mental health. And she talks about the importance of protein, because proteins are what the amino acids in protein are what make neurotransmitters. So if your dopamine is low, you by eating protein, you increase the amount of neurotransmitters that you produce. Serotonin as well. You produce more serotonin, which is gives you a good feeling as well. Those are really important to mood, and mood is always important to ADHD. ADHD and mood are really very much linked. So I tend to, the other thing is when it comes to food or what you put in your body, drinking enough water is important as well. You want to drink, you want to be hydrating well. Your brain, and this is, there was somebody years ago, I had hired a kinesiologist who to work with my daughter because she had a lot of problems with reading. And this kinesiologist, first thing she would do is give her a glass of water. And I'd say, why are you giving her water? She says, well, because that's going to help her be better at focusing. And I'm rolling my eyes thinking, oh gosh, where are you getting this information? But it was true. It was absolutely true. This was before I became a coach, by the way, before I studied on this. I was actually quite shocked. And I often tell my clients, when you're tired, when you're feeling sluggish, grab a glass of water, and within a few 10 minutes or so, our brain requires quite a bit of water. When we are only 1% dehydrated, we lose 10% of our cognitive abilities, our ability to think. When we only 2% dehydrated, I think it's somewhere around 30% loss in cognitive abilities. So that's pretty substantial, especially if already your cognitive your cognitive abilities are low because already you're struggling because you've been focusing all day and it's exhausting. So that's what I have to say about that. Yep.
Is that study or do you have a section on the website that has those resources with those studies that we can kind of look them up?
Don't think so.
I don't think so. I'm building a community on which I do share these types of information. Let me see. I could tell you the name of the person. You can Google her, Eva Selhub. So the name is in the chat, Eva Selhub. But there's been a few things. I saw even recently an Attitude article that came out just recently on nutrition, and they said a lot about the same things. That they didn't mention her, but they mentioned other people who talked about some of the research that's been done. So
like Dr. Daniel Amen, who talks about the protein and the and he's written the book, The 6 Types of ADD. So that's a very important one.
Yeah, it's a good resource. Megan.
Yes.
Not actually Megan, it's Megan's mother.
Megan's mother.
Okay, it's Lisa. I am the parent of 2 ADHD adults now, and I wonder if you see a difference with your tips about making lists and things like that, if they're more effective with women than with men.
I think it depends on the openness of the child to receive information. The other thing is, I think when you're creating lists, you need their feedback. You need their input as well. Even when they're young, I think it's a good idea to get their input. When my young daughter was, when Kiri was, 6, I had to get to work. I had to drop them off to school and then get to work on time. And I was always late because she was just so slow in the morning. And it was, I was getting into trouble at work. So she and I sat down and I said, we need to determine what you need to get done in the morning. And so that I could get to work on time. So she and I sat down and created a list. Now, she couldn't read at 6. She wasn't reading a whole lot. She suffers from dyslexia as well. So what I got some little pictures and was able to make a list, and we put that on the fridge. And every morning I'd wake her up and she'd say, Mom, I'm coming to the fridge. And I'd go and I'd run with the chronometer, with the timer. And I'd say, okay, let's go. And she would check, okay, so I'm supposed to make my bed. So she'd run in her room, make her bed, and then come back and look at the list. She was very open to that list because she had been participating in doing it. So I think openness is probably bigger. I think women are a lot more likely to play around with lists. We tend to, in our roles in society, deal with a lot more detail. Us as moms and so on, we deal with a lot more of the nitty gritty of everyday life than the guys do. Even though we want to pretend that everything is perfectly split, it really isn't. So so doing that, playing that game worked really well, because when she got close to the end of her list, and I kind of diverted there, but we get to the end of the list and she'd say, I'm almost done. And I'd meet her at the fridge and I'd stop the timer and we'd just jump like crazy women in our, crazy girls in our kitchen, celebrating the fact that she got everything done and we were on time for me to leave with her to take her to school and get to work on time. But playing those types of games as well can be very helpful. So Liz, what are you finding in terms of in your experience?
Well, I find my adult children are 24 and 26, and I find my daughter is much more willing to try a strategy than my son is, who I feel really needs the strategy more than she does.
Yeah.
And, if I say, well, this expert said you should be writing a list, how far that's going to go. So that's why I was kind of wondering about,
Yeah, I've noticed that. I think boys are more rebellious at that age. And it's normal, by the way, for your kids to be rebellious at 20. They don't want to be mom and dad telling them what to do. So if they're willing to be supported, I was lucky. My kids were willing to get my support. I think mainly, and maybe it has nothing to do with that. Maybe they were more prone to doing that, but I very rarely, I'm not a very judgmental person. So if they make a mistake, we don't look at the mistake as, okay, so let's look at this and say, what did we learn from this and what can we do? And we work on that. So I'm very careful with doing that, because Kiri really has this very strong, almost like PTSD around being attacked. So she sees a lot of things as attacks, but she knows that I'm not one of those people who attacks. So thank you for sharing that, Mega's mom, and good luck. Elena, I see Elena's name, and then Renee. Elena Pagnola.
Hi,
Okay.
sorry
Hi.
about that. Having some difficulty. I just wanted to know how much time. Okay, I realize that you're offering the course, and I'm very thankful for that. I, like many people, ADHDers, I tend to put too much on my plate. And so although I want to commit to this and start this, I need to know realistically how much time I should be devoting or expect to devote to the program to feel successful. Because like many, I said, I have a tendency to start and I'll go strong for about a week. And then you go back into your comfort zone because there's too much.
So this is a beginner kind of onboarding type of course. So it's you get a short video of 5 to 10, maybe I think there might be one that's a bit more than that, maybe 20 minutes. And everything that you're taught what you're taught and what we invite you to do are things you would do in your everyday life. So it doesn't take much more time than that. So for example, one might be like I talked before about, I think the success journal or the gratitude journal is one of the first strategies. I think it is a success journal with people with ADHD to gain that self-acceptance. So having a strategy where all you do is in point form, write 5 things or 3 things that you've been successful at doing. It might be one of those strategies. So it's not stuff that takes a long time. It's really to build certain types of routines that support your mental, your ADHD, but also your mental status. And you're right, you cannot add more hours. We all have 168 hours in our week, and we are already using it. So when you add anything that's going to be substantial, you have to let something else go, put it aside before, and give yourself I think it's a nice thing to give yourself as a gift to take care of yourself. Put that oxygen mask on yourself as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. René Charland, you are unmuted. You are muted.
Right. I just wanted to mention something about on the same topic as Megan did before, because I also have adult kids with ADHD, and I found that it really helps when you enlist them to sort of like participate in finding solutions.
Yeah.
Because if you ask them, okay, let's brainstorm something, you're not telling them, okay, this is how we're going to do it. This is how an expert says you should do it. You sit and you brainstorm with them and you figure out like what can work for you.
Absolutely.
And it seems to be at least well received. Now, whether they follow through, well, that's another level, but I find that really worked, and it's at least like we have a communication about it, which I found was really important.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And if you're open to having them, we want them to become adults. So to become adults, they need to have some power. And sometimes they make the wrong decision. That is the hardest thing as a parent, is to sit back and watch your kid make the wrong decision. And in that situation, I might ask questions that would make them think maybe about, so if you do that, what are some of the, what might happen that might work, and what would be the cons about that, and try to help them see both sides, because they don't necessarily see that. But not necessarily being okay sometimes, as long as the decision is not dangerous, being okay with letting them make their own mistakes. That's going to happen. But being there when they do make the mistake and helping them with exactly like you mentioned. So what do you think might work? And let's look at some strategies. The other thing that could help, and I have found that for a lot of parents, was having some other person tell them, as a parent to an adult child, you telling your kid what to do is not always well received, because they want to grow up. That's just it's a normal, natural part of growing up. The last thing I wanted when I was an adult was for my mom to tell me what I needed to do all the time. This is what you need to do. We don't like to. No adult likes to be told what to do. But if we struggle as parents to get them to listen to us, I know that often having, for example, someone like Linda or in the programs to support them and say, well, there's somebody might be able to help you. I know this is causing you a lot of challenges. You're forgetting this, so as a result, you're coming back and you're late, or you feel you're not ready. So Linda might be able to help you, Linda Aber, and you let them get the support there, and they're often more open to getting the support from somebody else. Yes, Pam.
I just wanted to say that not liking being told what to do is a classic ADD trait, and why so many of us become entrepreneurs on our own.
Yep.
Because we don't like to fit the mold of being told how to do, what to do, when.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're rebellious. You're also very creative. And it sucks to have all these really great ideas and then share them in your company and they don't do anything about it, or they take the whatever it is that you've thought of and they use it for their own, and it takes forever, so yeah, definitely. A lot of I was part of a support group in Montreal, and Dwayne is still part of that support group, but they would always say, we're all out of the box thinkers, and people say, what box? There's just no box for us. It's just, so there's, it's one of the things, and it's one of the reasons. There's actually some studies that show that ADHDers are divergent thinkers. They don't, often when you give somebody a problem, they will look at the solutions that have already been used in the past. People with ADHD tend to look outside the box, start with brand new solutions, and that's why they're considered more creative. So it's that divergent solution seeking that's, and it also ignites your brain. So that's pretty cool.
That's all wonderful, but it means nothing if you can't execute on it like me.
That's absolutely true. And that's why if you're an entrepreneur, I think at the beginning, a lot of my clients who are entrepreneurs at the beginning, they start off really gung-ho because what they have to do is interesting to them. Even doing their GST and PST for the first time is interesting to them because they've never done it before. They do it once and that's it. They don't want to do it again. But then as soon as you start making even a smidgen of money, hire a virtual assistant or someone. You don't have to hire someone full time. That was the best thing I ever did as an entrepreneur, was hire my first virtual assistant. She still works for me 13 or 14 years later. She knows my business inside and out. She doesn't work for me directly. I only buy, I think it's 10 hours a month from her. So it's not incredibly expensive. And when I did that, what happened, it liberated my brain for the things that I'm really good at. And she dealt with all the other stuff, and she was so good at it that it took her a smidgen of the amount of time that it took me to do the same stuff.
Excuse me.
So any other question?
I don't know. I've been developing this business from like last fall, and it's a very complex kind of thing. It's in the a medical AI space, and I'm terrified. I'm terrified. Like I'm terrified that I'm not going to be able to like carry through with it,
I see. And that could stop you. So what could be a small step that you might be able to take to get some information to see if there's any chance of, or even find someone who would be interested in your project, but who's a doer. There's some people who are that execute stuff, and you have and then the big thinkers, having that half of the puzzle, because the other guys who are doers are not necessarily people who will think outside the box like you can. But maybe look at doing some market research and finding out, talking to a few people in that industry to find out if what you have as an idea would work, and so on.
I did that already. I'm kind of looking for a co-founder actually, and it's very specific, like has to be computer vision, and it's kind of complicated. It's hard to find a co-founder, and I've actually been looking for a mentor, and I'm also disabled, so it's kind of complicated because I've been kind of looking also for that kind of a mentor or coach, kind of like a role model type of thing, and I haven't found anyone, and it's been tough in that sense. Like I really would have loved to have been connected with someone like that.
Yeah, I get that. It's not always easy to get the mentors that you need. I saw somebody else whose hand was up. Renee, did you have something to say? Yeah. You're still on mute.
Okay. You mentioned earlier about support group, and I was wondering if there is such a thing in Montreal as a community support group for ADHD.
Yeah, there's a few of them. Linda, we can't hear you. Can you speak about that? I know there's a few of them. But
our organization has had a weekly support group on Tuesday night since over a year. And if you go into our website, you'll see all the amazing programs we have. It's just incredible. And if you sign up on our newsletter, you'll see all the wonderful programs directly in a newsletter to you.
Okay.
So some webinars that are coming up at the end of the evening, maybe I can just, show them a fast little peek at the newsletter that's going to go out. So they'll see some of the programs, if that's okay with you guys at the MCLD.
Sure.
Yes. No?
Yeah.
As long as it pertains to ADD, yeah.
Well, yeah, I do the ADHD groups and Desiree does adults with LD.
Okay. Is it in person or is it
Unfortunately,
like
everything
Zoom?
is on Zoom.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, but it depends on the age of people. I mean, the parent group is open for parents who have kids from young ages all the way to young adults. And every week we have a different theme. You have to sign up and you have to join. So you have to go to the Montreal Center for Learning Disabilities under the What's New tab. You'll see all of our webinars, and then you'll see our parent support group, and it has its own page with 3 that are coming up.
So you have parent support, Linda? Do you have adult support groups?
We have adult support groups waiting to go. We do not have enough people signed up. I have a list.
I know there was one with the Royal Vic for a while there, but I'm not sure what's going on with that one.
The one that was at the
Allen,
Allen, the one that was at the Allen, where Joe was in charge of it many years ago, was our adult support group that went on for 10 weeks, and they wanted to continue. And so they continued on their own. So there was a whole group from us.
Yeah. So I know when COVID hit, they've gone. I'm not sure. I doubt that they meet anymore because I haven't heard anything of it. But
I think they are.
They still
every
are?
2 weeks. I think they are.
Yeah.
I think it's still at the Allen.
Okay.
Sometimes I get emails from them.
I'll have to ask Dwayne. He used to go.
It's hard to get into the group. I would refer them people, and they were very particular.
Oh.
But our support group, I mean, we help everyone.
Cool.
So you're not. So you're not the MCLD?
Yes, we are.
Oh, okay. So it's the same, like, organization then.
Yes.
We're not talking about the one at the Allen. The Allen is a different group.
No, I'm talking about the one that you're in charge of.
Yes, the MCLD.
Okay, okay.
Let me see if I can pull it up.
We should wrap this up. We could maybe display the newsletter after. Did you want to close us up, Linda Aber?
Oh, well, hold on, because I was going to pull up the newsletter I got.
We can pull it up after.
Okay, you'll do it?
I could, yeah, while you thank her.
Hold on. Can you give me 2? Is there anybody else who's going to ask a question? Because then I'll go straight and open it up. Hold on. Give me 2 minutes.
We also have a number of webinars coming up. And they're all free.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to show them as long as I can get it. Hang on. Let's see if I can find it.
We can, Linda, maybe we can send it to everyone.
Well, it's not ready to be sent out, sweetheart. That's the whole problem. So,
That's okay. I can email it whenever it's ready.
I got it. Hang on. Let me go back to you. We can't email it to people unless they've become expressed. It's a law. We can't just add people onto our newsletter. It's a Canadian law that they have to subscribe.
They need to subscribe.
So
They need to
that's the whole
right.
thing. So let me show it to you so you'll see what's coming up. This is just a template. Oh, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it all, but we have November the 16th on a Tuesday. It's all about psychoeducational assessments, getting the answers. So it's the nuts and bolts with Marlene Desjardins. So that is Tuesday the 16th. November the 23rd, also a Tuesday, we have Technology Addiction in Our Youth, the Problem and the Solution with Rabbi Benjamin Bresninger. He's absolutely amazing. He's so inspirational and powerful. I love him. I love him. And then we have on February the 8th, this guy is so well known. He's from Australia and he's written a book all about the internet and tech addiction for young children. So he's going to be talking about the nuts and the meat and the potatoes, 7 unplugged tips on what parents could do to manage screen time, gaming time. So that's coming up in February. And then in our parent support groups that I run, Tuesday, November the 9th, we're going to be talking about how to effectively help regulate our children and teens' emotions. And then on November 30th, it's the importance of play and giggles. And then on 14th of December, reacting versus responding. So in those difficult moments, what are you doing? Are you responding or are you reacting? Because what you do really helps. It either helps or it hurts. So that is some of the upcoming stuff. And if you go to our website, you can sign up for all of them, especially the webinars. Sign up and you'll get the Zoom link. Does anyone?
I don't see any other questions, so I know it was amazing being here with you guys. It's been a while.
Well, hold on. Linda, my darling.
What?
I want to thank you so much on behalf of everybody tonight, sharing your insights, sharing your knowledge, sharing your time, and empowering all of us this evening. You're just amazing.
Thank you so much, Linda.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda.
It's nice seeing you guys.
Always.
Again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for
Thank you
attending.
very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Karen.